Rule number one is never give up. Success is always there. It's just on a certain time frame. And so working as hard as possible, making as many relationships, developing relationships with as many people as possible that share your vision and want to see change in the world.
Welcome to the Strategy at Scale podcast, brought to you by Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. I'm your host, Kyan Krippendorf. Our mission in this podcast is to cut through a sea of conflicting business advice and get to what actually works. We talk to entrepreneurs and business builders who have successfully scaled companies across industries to extract proven, high-impact strategies for building long-term value. You just heard from Shaun Noorian, the founder and CEO of Empower Pharmacy, the compounding pharmacy in the United States. Shaun's story is about scale, but not the kind you get by raising huge rounds and chasing buzz. It's about building infrastructure, obsessing over quality, and architecting a vertically integrated business in one of the most complex regulated industries out there. What started in a 100-foot exam room inside a Houston doctor's office is now a 340,000 square foot pharmaceutical operation with over 1,300 employees, FDA registration, and national reach. But what makes Shaun's story so valuable, especially for founders operating in constrained or regulated environments, is how he's done it. No shortcuts, no outside capital dictating growth, and a relentless focus on what patients actually need. Shaun didn't come from healthcare. He came from mechanical engineering. A personal crisis introduced him to compounding medicine, and what he saw wasn't just healing, it was a broken system that desperately needed rethinking. If we look back at the entrepreneurs that we have covered on this podcast, we often see this pattern that they identify where a system is broken. And he set out to build the infrastructure that didn't exist to fix that system. In this episode, we cover how Shaun scaled from a rented back room to a national pharmaceutical provider, why Empower's prices go down every year, even while competitors' prices go up, how vertical integration gave him pricing power, operational speed, and strategic control, why he chose debt over equity, and what founders should know about funding freedom, the systems and culture needed to scale in an environment when mistakes can cost lives, and how rethinking the supply chain of his industry became not just a growth strategy, but a mission. Whether you're building a business in healthcare, manufacturing, or any system stacked up against the customer, this is a story about staying mission-driven while scaling smart. Let's dive in with Shaun Noorian. Shaun, thank you so much for taking the time to sit down with us. I know that you have many, many things that you are dedicating your time to that are very important, and appreciate you spending some time to pause and sit with us and share with us. Thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me, Kayan. It's always a pleasure to be able to educate others.
Awesome.
And give them the benefits that I've been lucky enough to be able to experience being at the head of this organization for the past 16 years.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Amazing. Great. And you are talking to us from Texas?
Yep. Born and raised here in Houston. Parents came over from Iran back in the late 70s. And I've been very lucky to be able to enjoy such an amazing city with such a largest medical center in the world, a lot of great prescribers, academics, that are really leading the charge when it comes to personalized medicine and concierge health. So it's now that I've been exposed to this, I've got to spread the word to as many patients as possible, like ourselves. And so, thanks for giving me the opportunity on your platform.
So we're going to dig into the story of the founding of Empower Pharmacy. But it's not sort of what's interesting for me is that other people that we've interviewed here that are entrepreneurs, they're kind of serial entrepreneurs and they've tried a lot of things. You, at least from my understanding, you started off as a mechanical engineer. There was a personal situation that led you to this. It's not that you were, I'm reading into it. It's not that you were saying, what business can I start? It was a problem to solve. So can you just tell us a little bit about your story?
Absolutely. So my background is in engineering. I had no idea I'd ever be in the pharmacy space when I was studying engineering in school. But when I graduated school with my mechanical engineering degree back in December
Not a
of 2007,
chemical engineering degree, a mechanical. Mm-hmm.
Right, yeah, exactly. I wanted to build cars since I was a kid. So I pursued mechanical engineering with an emphasis on automotive engineering. But when I graduated in late 2007, The car industry was not doing very well at the time. And so I couldn't get a job working for any of the big car manufacturers. So I ended up doing oil and gas, which is a very popular job to do when you're in Texas. And I ended up working for Schlumberger doing hydraulic fracturing as a field engineer. And about 9 months on the job, I lifted a heavy piece of metal the wrong way and injured my lower back. I ended up hemorrhaging some of my lower vertebrae. And so I was put in physical therapy, and the doctors that were treating me at the time noticed I was very skinny for my age. Give you an idea of how that was. I'm 5'10". Back then I weighed 125 pounds. Just always been a skinny kid, always. Could never get any weight, no matter what I did. And they determined why I was so skinny my entire life and why I couldn't gain any weight. It turns out I had the testosterone level of an 80-year-old man. And so, I was very lucky, I guess, to have gotten injured so I could get diagnosed, because if I hadn't gotten injured, I probably would have gone undiagnosed for many more decades. And that doctor sent me to a specialist here in Houston, which, like I mentioned, has the largest medical center in the world. So I got paired with one of the greatest providers in the space that quickly diagnosed me with a pituitary disorder. And that explained why I was so skinny, why I was always tired, why I had erectile dysfunction, why, I've taken a nap in the middle of the day. It really, I had all the symptoms of hypogonadism or low testosterone, but I just never thought about it because that was my normal. And so that doctor, he was very wise. He knew to send me to a compounding pharmacy because he realized, one, that his patients would need to be on these medications for the rest of our lives, and two, that these medications were increasing in cost every single year by about 10%.
You need to tell us what is a compounding pharmacy?
So, good question. The compounding pharmacy is a type of pharmacy that actually makes the medications on site, just the way the doctor ordered it. So if there's a commercial medication out there that's in a strength, dosage form, or dosage combination that's not available commercially, that provider can then partner with a compounding pharmacy, and we can make that medication customized for the individual patient. And so we really work with the provider to optimize patient outcomes where commercial medications may not be appropriate or just aren't available anymore because they've been orphaned or discontinued or just unobtainable due to cost. And we're seeing that, many medications that their costs keep increasing over time, providers send them to compounding pharmacies because they can be assured our prices decrease over time. So, for example, the traditional pharmaceutical industry, the average price increase every year is about 10%. For the compounding industry, the average price decrease is about 5% so that prices actually go down. This past year, we did an assessment and we noticed that our prices, on the 400 plus different drugs that we make here, the overall, it was about a 30.3% decrease in cost over a single year. And the way we're able to accomplish that is through simple economies of scale. Turns out, if you lower the cost of a medication, more patients have access to it.
Right. The demand curve, like on economics, you bring down the price, that opens up further demand, which then you can have better economies of scale and profitably deliver. I gotcha.
That's absolutely right. And the traditional pharmaceutical industry is a little different. The way they price their medications is to determine what's the most amount of profit that can be made off of a certain population and off a certain socioeconomic model where certain patients, there's a difference between the amount of patients that can afford it and the maximum profit that can be made at a certain price point. And so the difference between, that model is really not optimized for patient access, optimized for shareholder profit. Whereas our model, turns out if we lower the price as low as possible, we can get as many patients taking these medications, which at the end of the day, we don't optimize for the most potential profit we can make in the drug, but we still do very well and end up making about 20% margins at the end of the day. And by offering a lower price compared to the rest of the market, we can bring as many patients into our system, which then further pushes the flywheel of pricing power as well as economies of scale. So that's kind of how we think of medication pricing and availability.
All right, so I want to get into those advantages and that kind of strategy. But before we go there, just tell us kind of what was that first Empower Pharmacy? What did it look like? Where was it? And what does it look like now? Just give us a original and current state just to have us visualize.
Sure. So when my doctor put me on compounded medication, it completely changed my life. And at that point, I knew that my mission would now be to expand access to these medications to as many patients like myself. And in the beginning, I didn't think, this would be a size organization that it is today. I was just trying to serve my local community. And so I ended up finding a room for rent, an exam room in the back of a doctor's office, about 150 square feet, and used my background in IT, manufacturing, quality control, and got licensed as a pharmacy technician so I could legally work inside of that pharmacy. Hired a pharmacist, and then got to work what I would want, giving patients what I would want from that experience. And what do patients want? We want low cost, we want good service, and we want good quality. That's pretty much it. And so, got to work in that 150 square foot space. And over time, learned pharmacy from the ground up, getting my hands dirty, learning what it's like to make medications, how to do marketing, sales, how to go out and work with our providers to R&D new formulations that may better serve their patient populations than what's commercially available on the market. And then slowly expanded into a 1,500 square foot space, introduced sterile compounding, got licensed in all 50 states, got a clean room, started working inside that clean room, learning how to make sterile medications. And then, of course, ensuring that the costs always stay lower than the rest of our competitors, so we can bring in more patients and get better quality and better service at the lowest cost possible. And then just reiterating those metrics to make sure that we can then put much profit back into certain areas of the company where we would see more value created for our patients and providers. And then around 2016, we ended up registering with the FDA and getting registered as a certain type of manufacturer called a 503B outsourcing facility, which then allowed us to be able to reach every single B2B end user, whereas the compounding pharmacy can only reach B2C pharmaceutical end users. So instead of dispensing directly to patients, we can now dispense to hospitals.
Wow.
And providers, clinics, and institutions. And so we could touch every single pharmaceutical end user in the entire country and develop that relationship directly with them, meeting their needs and cutting out many of the unnecessary middlemen that plague our current healthcare system and increase costs.
It seems like there wasn't like this, and I think that many entrepreneurs have a mythology about them that there was this aha moment of insight. And I get from you that was sort of like maybe an emerging of this opening up of this possibility. You recognize that you decided you were going to invest in become in a clean room. I want to know what that involves. What I've seen is that it's not just a broom. You have to invest a lot to be able to qualify for that. You start realizing the B2B opportunity. What are some of the things that you saw that gave you the conviction to make this not a activity for my community, but to be something that would be for everyone?
That's a great question. It was really just asking our patients and providers what they would want. And it turns out our providers, they wanted not just non-sterile products, but sterile products. And they wanted a certain set of sterile products. And then they wanted us to serve their patients in different states. And so then we had to get licensed in different states. So the way we operate is we always, we ask ourselves what's best for the patients and what's best for our providers' interests. And then we determine what's the best way we can deliver that to them as quickly as possible at the lowest cost possible, but still giving us the ability to scale exponentially so we don't run into bottlenecks or backorder situations. And so it's a constant process of determining ROI, money spent, and potential new profits coming in to be able to then reinvest in more products, bring in more products to market, larger facilities, bigger clean rooms, more staff, more marketing, more everything, so that at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is build a long-term pharmaceutical service. And that means putting in a lot of infrastructure, whether it be personnel or clean rooms or equipment or facility, whatever it takes to make sure that we can continue to scale exponentially without running into capacity issues.
Gotcha. So that commitment, so let's talk a little about your competitive advantages. And I understand that your competitive advantage can be used for lots of purposes. One is just to make a lot of money for shareholders, and it can also be used to pursue the mission that you're pursuing. One competitive advantage that you are talking about here is scale. So just tell us about, how do you think about scale as a competitive advantage?
When you're thinking about expanding at an exponential rate, and you're making a product, you know, you're making 1,600% more product in 4 years at a simple, 2, 4, 8, 16. Every year it's expanding. And the facilities like this, that are very advanced facilities, they take about 4 years to construct. So as soon as we enter a facility, let's say that facility does about 16 to 20 times the capacity of the previous facility, we know we're going to run out. And so we have to start building the next facility as soon as we enter the new one. And so the way we think of it is looking at the equipment, always working with our engineering teams to ensure that we have the right size facilities, the right equipment that can manufacture medications at a certain rate, and of course at a certain quality level, because that's another thing that we differentiates ourselves from many of our competitors, is that we invest more into quality than anybody else. And when you're making drugs that are destined to be injected into people, quality means a lot. And that means a lot to our patients. It means a lot to our providers. It means a lot to all of our stakeholders. So, then there's it's leveraging debt to be able, and getting capital in to be able to build the most advanced facilities of their type, knowing that at a certain point of time, we will need that type of facility to meet not just the business needs over the next 4 years, but future business needs as we continue to grow and bring patients and providers into a different kind of healthcare system that meets their needs for first and foremost. And of course, at the same time, decreasing costs and improvement while improving margins just based on these economies of scale.
So what I hear is like one, so I want to ask you about where you get your capital from and how you think about who you would take capital from, because we had one guest on this podcast, David Wharton, and he writes about these evergreen companies. And what he advises is, do not take VC funding, do not go public, do not take private equity funding, because regardless of what they'll tell you at the beginning, they've got a 5-year window. And towards that last 5 years, they're going to say, I want more profit. And I fear that your strategy also depends on something that Costco kind of does. I think Costco does, which is they never make more than, I'm not going to get this number exactly right, never make more than 14% markup on products. They make their money from the membership, but they have this policy. Now, if they had investors that were saying, hey, we can make 25%, there's going to be that tension. So how do you ensure that you're going to, how do you think about who you're willing to take capital from?
That's a great question. It's a different situation, different story for every single company. Depends on, how profitable your business is to begin with. Also depends on how quickly you think you can grow. The way I've always thought about it is, I want to be able to ensure that I have enough control to be able to guide this type of business, to ensure that it's always in the best interest of patients, first and foremost. And it turns out, if you just do what's in the best interest of patients, patients will come use you. And but in the beginning, it was really just debt, leveraging debt a little amount to be able to build that next generation.
And a
facility.
lot of what you're building and you're investing in is asset. You can get asset-backed debt, I guess, against it, or property-backed.
Yep, that's right. Yep. Sale leasebacks. We can also we've always been profitable since day one, and so we know we have a certain amount of cash that's being generated by the business that we then project and ensure that we can meet our current needs, but at the same time, being able to ensure continued exponential growth. So it's a lot of reinvestment back into the business. Currently, I still own the majority of the shares in this company, and we're thinking about bringing on an equity partner, but for a minority recapitalization, so that we can ensure that we can still grow at an exponential rate without the founder losing control, and ensuring that the system that we're building is, at the end of the day, built for the best interest of patients and providers. And I think if a company does what's in the best interest of their customers, they will be much more successful than if they do what's in the short-term interests of their shareholders.
And I think what we're talking about now is the kind of the next topic, which is the aligning of things to ensure, because you've identified your goal, the opportunity and goal. You've said what is going to differentiate us. One of those things being that investing for the long term to maximize impact on patients. And you also have a profitable model from day one as well, which is very helpful. And now you're aligning your investor base. You're also going to align, I would imagine, I don't know, your culture, your processes, who you hire, your operations, technology. Talk to us a little bit about your decisions on aligning the stuff to make sure that you are perfectly made to deliver on that strategy.
Absolutely. The first thing that matters most in a company like this, and I think it should be mimicked in many companies, is making sure that your company's values are congruent with the product or service that you're offering. And so our values are quality, service, people, and innovation. And so the people that we onboard, we have to make sure that their values match ours and that their characteristics and capabilities match ours so that they'd be successful within our organization. In healthcare, I think that ethics is the most important quality. If you're doing unethical behavior, patients get hurt. People actually get hurt in our industry. And so those are just table stakes. And so we look for people that are mission driven, want to make a change in an industry, want to serve others, are selfless, not selfish, want to work with others, collaborate, are eager to be able to solve problems. And of course, at the end of the day, bring new ideas to the table. So because there's so many problems that we have in healthcare, it's such a broken system. There's so many ways of fixing it and making it better. And it really takes people that are cohesive, forward-thinking, and ethical if you want to make real progress and in the system that we're trying to create.
Yeah. And I saw the way I met you was I met your COO, Jonathan, at a conference in Vancouver. And I absolutely see that in him. How do you recruit for that? How do you test for that?
Gosh, we got very lucky with Jonathan. He was actually my cousin and was a whip smart engineer, also a mechanical engineer like myself, great at solving problems, and one of the most ethical people I've ever met. I grew up with this kid, so that kid never did anything
that
wrong.
That was a long interview, many years long interview to choose your COO. Got it.
Exactly. But since then, it's really about getting out there, letting people know what you're about, what you're trying to accomplish, and then of course, spending a lot of time with them to determine if they are the right fit for the role and what terms the right fit, like that their values are congruent with our companies, and making sure that they are patient-centric, mission-driven, and have an insatiable appetite for change management, because there's so much that needs to be done. And it takes a very rare breed of individual that can handle the amount of complexity that goes on in a system like ours that is fully vertically integrating the pharmaceutical supply chain, becoming the manufacturer, wholesaler, pharmacy, all in one, and reimagining the relationships that we have with pharmaceutical end users and working for their needs, designing a system that best serves their interests. It takes a lot of time. For every 100 people that apply, typically only one gets the position. And so it's very important to build a great talent acquisition organization and be involved, especially in the beginning, in those very important first hires that every entrepreneur has to make.
Let's stick a little bit on, because the way that you've designed the business, because your vision is so different, there've got to be things that you have done in designing the business to ensure that you're pursuing this vision. Vision is not a path that's been pursued before, right? It's different than other entrepreneurs. You're not trying to be one of the 10 biggest something. You're trying to build something new. So there must be decisions that you've made that are different. What are some of the decisions you've made that are different, and how do you ensure that you stick with those decisions?
There's a lot. What I've been doing over the past years is one, being able to experience what it's like to be an optimized human being, and offer that to all of our employees. Give them free IV nutrition, give them a sponsor concierge functional medicine program, give them benefits that no other company could really give them, and giving them the ability to perform like a world-class athlete, and at the same time, offering great compensation, putting in non-qualified stock options, giving them out to personnel throughout the company, incentivizing everybody to be geared towards the same mission of getting as many patients into this system that can sustain them. And of course, it's all, of course, building the most advanced facilities of their type in the country, giving them access to these facilities, giving everybody access to pharmaceutical grade water if they want to drink it, giving them access to clean room grade air, in all of our offices. It's really rethinking about, how we can make our employees' experience as beneficial company and let them experience what it's like to be part of this new system that they are then providing to our patients and providers.
I love that. So it becomes like a visceral, tangible kind of experience of what the possibility is that you're designing for. I love that. So just to help us who are not in the industry understand the entanglements, complexity, the changes of what it is that you're building for, can you just describe for me what is, when you are at that stage where most patients are in the system that you're designing, how does that system look differently than what it looks like now? I don't know who pays, how the providers, how things are distributed, like just looking at that industry system, because there are, as with all innovators, there are people, as Machiavelli said, when you're trying to introduce a new order of things, you'll have enemies and all those who have done well under the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders will do well under the new. There's this changing of order. I'd just like to illustrate that changing of order for us.
Right. And you're absolutely right. I mean, we've seen that the incumbents that are currently serving the vast majority of patients in this country through the current healthcare system that we have do not want to see much change. And if you look at those stakeholders, you've got pharmaceutical manufacturers, wholesalers, pharmacies, pharmacy benefit managers, hospital systems, insurance carriers. I mean, there are a lot of middlemen in this system. And many of them are just doing nothing but exchanging information. They're not really exchanging drugs. And so, at the end of the day, what we try to do is, the system that's being created because of the consumerization of healthcare that's occurred post-pandemic, where telemedicine has been introduced, where patients can really just get access to a specialist 24 hours a day, wherever they are, and be able to have that conversation with that specialist. And if they qualify for that medicine, then have that medicine delivered to their doorstep the very next day. I mean, that is a much more efficient healthcare system than a patient going to their primary care provider and then being sent to a specialist and then being sent to the pharmacy and maybe having to do a prioritization, or maybe their insurance doesn't cover it, so they have to find a coupon to be able to get access to it. Like, it's just unnecessary complexity involved. So what we're seeing the system, it's being streamlined, where the middlemen that are just exchanging information, nothing else, are being cutting out. And then companies like ours are just dealing directly with the patient, directly with the provider, and keeping that relationship, that sacred relationship, close. And then meeting their needs. What are the needs? Like I said, they want good quality medication. They want it quickly, conveniently, and they want it at a low cost. And so this is the health system, dealing with telemedicine companies, dealing with providers that are really concentrating on functional medicine, preventative medicine. This is the area where we see we can make the most difference, because insurance does not want to cover any of this. Preventive medicine is all cash in the first place. And it turns out, if you take care of a patient, if you invest in them, in their health, they won't have some of these catastrophic events in the future, like cancer or sarcopenia or metabolic disorders or diabetes. And but insurance companies just don't want to make that investment, because they typically lose that patient every 3 years. Patients transfer from one employers where patients get most of their medications and healthcare services from. They're covering the costs. And the average time someone spends in a company is about 3 years. Well, once they move from that company, they move to a different one. That different company has a different insurer, most likely. And then all that investment that the insurance company did is now lost and then goes to advantage a competitor. So it's not a very good system the way it's designed. And so so the system is not designed to keep people healthy. It's really designed to make them sick. And because of functional medicine providers and this new telemedicine pathway to be able to get access to medications, we're seeing the preventative functional medicine integrative health markets really transition to a cash pay model that ends up, kicking the insurance carriers and the pharmacy benefit managers out of the system. And of course, those two middlemen drive upward of 50% of the cost
Really?
of medicine in the country. Yeah,
Wow.
in many cases.
Wow.
And all they're doing is just exchanging information. So it's and so by removing them and tying the patient directly with a provider that can give them access to that medication, when that medication lowering cost over time, that provider can now be assured that that patient can be compliant with their therapies for the rest of their life, while at the same time improving their quality of life and outcomes.
I hadn't thought about that. I guess I kind of thought at the high level of, the and no pharmaceutical company would say that they are driven by increasing the spend that they capture from their patients, right? They'll say that they're interested in preventative treatments, but I can see the motivation of being, well, just doing the math of treating someone after something happens generates more revenue than treating now. But I hadn't thought about the insurers and the fact that their customer lifetime value calculation is 3 years, and they're thinking this person's probably not going to get sick in the next 3 years. It'll be someone else's problem. So let's not do anything to prevent the long-term consequences. I hadn't thought of that. So what you're really seeing is like a very improperly incentivized system. And so one unlock is the cash system. So people are paying for, or employers are paying for the treatment rather than insurance. How do you see that evolving? Do you think that will be a permanence? And are you seeing a propensity for people to be willing to pay for their own treatment, even if they have insurance? Or how is that going to play out?
Yeah, and there are a couple things that are very interesting. It turns out if you pay cash, in many cases, it's less expensive than going through your insurance. If you think about, you got to pay a copay to your primary care provider, you got to pay a copay to the specialist, you got to pay a copay to the pharmacy. If you just done this using a cash-based method, which of course, because there's so many competitors now in the cash-based market, the prices are just going down drastically over time. And so the medication and the service is in many cases more affordable than if they were to use their insurance.
And wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. And at the same time, we also see patients preferring to use providers that are using compounded medication. So in the case of employers, I think we'll see that many employers, especially self-insured employers, will start utilizing compounding pharmacies and outsourcing facilities like ours to push their patients, their employees, towards a system like ours that can save them thousands of dollars a month per employee on some medications that are just unobtainable because they're not within they can't afford to put it within their formulary. And so we see compounding as being a solution to some of these medications that a very large employee pools just can't get access to.
We've got this differentiated goal, which leads to a differentiated strategy, which differentiated operations. And we've talked a little bit about your investment priorities and also capital priorities. But looking at the capital side of the equation, I guess the way to phrase it, I think, and if you want to answer it differently, that's fine, is if you were a traditional, say, pharmaceutical production company, you would be investing in certain things. You'd be investing in infrastructure, marketing and sales and people maybe, but you're trying to create a new order of things. So I'm wondering, as you think about what you put your profit towards, is it different than a more traditional alternative to you? And what how are your investment decisions different?
And one thing that differentiates us from traditional pharmaceutical manufacturers like Pfizer, is that they have to spend a lot of money R&Ding to bring a new molecule to market. So the new drug application process can cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, and really take up to 10 years. And there's no guarantee that that new molecule will make it to the market. One thing that makes us very advantageous compared to those traditional manufacturers is that we can R&D a product and bring it to market within, for up to about $10,000 for a non-sterile product and 3 months for a non-sterile product, or about $100,000 and 6 months for a sterile product. But we're not creating new molecules. We're just taking molecules that have already been FDA approved and changing their dosage, form, strength, or combination. And so that is one major advantage that we have, which gives us the ability to invest not as much money into R&D, but put that money into other places in the business, like marketing or sales or infrastructure and equipment or personnel. And that's really where that's what we've done in order to grow our business. It's concentrate on the things that matter the most and invest. And of course, having a project management office to be able to organize all the thousands of different projects within the company to ensure that the ones that have the most impact get the most resources, and always learning and reiterating where these projects fall in order to figure out, due to environmental changes or economic changes or market changes, which projects we should be dedicating more of our focus to.
Could you just characterize for us where you are now and where you aspire to be or you intend to be in the future?
It's always been the same. We're never big enough. There's so many patients that need access to these medications. And currently the compounding market only makes up 3% of all pharmaceuticals dispensed in this country. The other 97% is big pharma. And within the compounding market, we as a company only make up 3%. So we're 3% of 3%. Like, that's just in the United States. And so, the question is, like, how quickly can we get access to the hundreds of millions of patients in this country that could all benefit from preventative medicine, from functional medicine? And so, there's really no end. This company, while it's the largest in the industry, it's still in its infancy. And we see ourselves continuing to grow exponentially to bring on these patients into a more virtuous supply chain and healthcare system so that we can serve them and give them access to these performance-enhancing, life-changing drugs for the rest of their lives. Currently, being the largest compounding pharmacy in the market, we have a 170,000 square foot compounding pharmacy, and then we have another 170,000 square foot 503B outsourcing facility, currently employ about 1,300 employees, and have experienced about a 76% CAGR over the past 16 years. And we see ourselves continuing to grow exponentially as millions more patients are added to our system every single year.
All right, I'm drawing so many insights from this that other entrepreneurs can use to help make smarter decisions, to achieve what they're in the world to achieve. What would be your advice to an entrepreneur looking to scale a business in a complex, maybe unfair environment as you are in order to transform it? What advice do you have for the aspiring entrepreneur?
Rule number one is never give up. Success is always there. It's just on a certain time frame. And so, working as hard as possible, making as many relationships, developing relationships with as many people as possible that share your vision and want to see change in the world. And then, of course, allocating, being all in, allocating as much capital as possible to putting back into the business so that it can keep up with exponential demand and growth. And I think if you meet all the qualifications of doing something that you like, something that turn out to be good at, and can learn how to monetize it to be able to then develop more revenue and put back in the business. I mean, just repeating that and creating that virtuous flywheel where you can bring in more patients, more customers, so you can build better facilities, so you can then bring in better quality systems, improve your service, and so forth and so forth. Just keep iterating forever until eventually you have something that's in the world that's better than the world was before it came.
Shaun, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for what you do, and for helping us learn from your experience. And it was really good to meet you and learn from you.
Okay, the pleasure was all mine. Thank you for everything that you do, helping entrepreneurs like us get the word out to other entrepreneurs and teach each other and make ourselves better. It's a never-ending cycle. So thanks for being part of it.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Strategy at Scale. Thank you to our guest, Shaun Noorian, our producer, Oscar Perez, and our teams at Scaling Up, Outthinker, and Growth Institute. If you like what you heard, please follow, download, and subscribe. I'm Kayan Krippendorf. We'll catch you soon with another episode of Strategy at Scale.